Good evening and welcome. It is time once again for CU Immigration here on WRFU LP Urbana, 104.5 FM. I will be your host for this evening. My name is Mr. Garza, and I am here to let you know that WRFU is an open forum for the Urbana-Champaign community. Views expressed are those of the speakers and are not intended to represent WRFU, UCIMC, or, as we like to say on the televised version of this show, UPTV. These views are our own, and by our, in this instance, if not in any other, I mean myself and whosever's views are kind of baked into the writing that I may be reading here tonight. So, we missed last week. I think we missed last week. I'm confused as to what's actually showing or playing where, because these get divided up in strange ways, and it's hard to keep track of. So I don't know. If I missed last week, I'm sorry. I'm here again. If I didn't miss last week, then I'm not sorry, and I'm here again. So either way, I'm here again. So here we go. Let's start off with some fact-checking from factcheck.org. This is entitled "The Facts on the Increase in Illegal Immigration." It's posted March 23rd, so just not that long ago. Democrats and Republicans are pointing fingers over an increase in illegal immigration at the southern border, and notably an increase in children traveling alone. While Democrats argue the surge began before President Joe Biden took office, Republicans argue Biden's welcoming policies are to blame. A rise in border apprehensions did begin prior to the election under then-President Donald Trump, but the increase in unaccompanied children has spiked significantly in the first full month of the Biden administration. The unaccompanied children are being held in custody in large numbers while the administration tries to catch up with a backlog in housing and processing them. We'll take a look at the immigration statistics and facts behind the recent increase. How many people are trying to cross the border illegally? Let's start with a look at the big picture. Apprehensions on the southwest border peaked in 2000 at 1.64 million and have generally declined since, with some fluctuations. In 2017, apprehensions hit the lowest level since 1972, but they spiked in fiscal year 2019 at 851,508 and fell back down to 400,651 in fiscal year 2020. On a monthly basis, over the past year, apprehensions plummeted to 16,182 in April 2020, as the coronavirus pandemic and economic shutdowns gripped both the U.S. and Mexico. But then apprehensions started ticking up again, increasing noticeably in late summer and fall. By October, 69,022 people were apprehended on the southwest border, up 79% from July. In February, the figure was 96,974. While the bulk of the increase comes from single adults, the number of children arriving at the border without an adult has gone up as well. Tony Payan, director of the Center for the United States and Mexico at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy, wrote in a March 15 blog post that, quote, "The current situation at the border is neither a unique crisis nor the result yet of Biden's policy changes," end quote. In a phone interview, he told us that while the apprehensions numbers are spiking now, this is not a new crisis. Instead, it has been going on since 2014, when we first saw unaccompanied minors and family units arriving at the border and turning themselves in, and the problem has plagued each administration since. As the chart above shows, apprehension spikes under the past two presidents in 2014 and 2019 similarly included sizable increases in family units and unaccompanied children arriving at the border. Other immigration experts writing in the Washington Post agree that the current increase in apprehensions fits a predictable pattern of seasonal changes in undocumented immigration, combined with a backlog of demand because of 2020's coronavirus border closure. It's not a surge, they said. Overall, Payan said, the patterns of migration do not seem to correlate to any specific U.S. immigration policy. The numbers seem to go up and down on a logic of their own. people leave their home countries for reasons other than U.S. policy, such as deteriorating economic, political, or public safety conditions. How does this increase in unaccompanied children crossing the border compare with past increases? The recent numbers are on track to rival or surpass the spike of unaccompanied children apprehended in 2019. A report from the Nonpartisan Congressional Research Service sums up the trends in what the government calls UAC, unaccompanied alien children, this way. In federal year 2014, the Department of Homeland Security, Customs and Border Protection apprehended 68,541 UAC, or unaccompanied children, a record at that time. Since federal year 2014, UAC apprehensions have fluctuated considerably, declining to 39,970 in federal year 2015, increasing to 59,692 in federal year 2016, and declining to 41,435 in federal year 2017, then increasing to 50,036 in federal year 2018. In fiscal year 2019, the number of unaccompanied children who were apprehended, 76,020, surpassed 2014's total, a new yearly record. And in fiscal 2020, which ended on September 30th, the total dropped considerably to 30,557. And I'm sorry, above when I was reading that as federal year 2015, I meant fiscal year. I just lost my mind for a second. So please go back and replace that in your mind with fiscal year 2015. Anyway. At just 5 months into this fiscal year, the number is already at 29,010. The number of unaccompanied children being apprehended at the southern border did start trending up in October, but also jumped 63% from January to February, when the total was 9,297. As Payan said, the issue started in 2014 and has been a problem for each administration. Teresa Cardinal Brown, Managing Director of Immigration and Cross-Border Policy at the Bipartisan Policy Center, told us that 2014 was not only the first time there was a dramatic increase in unaccompanied children, but migrants also came from Central America, not Mexico. The border facilities and the system of processing unaccompanied minors under law were designed for the time when the vast majority of encounters at the border were single adult Mexican males who were processed and returned across the border very quickly, often within a day, Brown said in an email. But Central Americans could not be sent back across to Mexico, and if they applied for asylum or were UACs, would have to be taken into custody and provided an opportunity to make their case in immigration court. Sarah Pierce, a policy analyst with the Migration Policy Institute, said the increases of families and unaccompanied children in 2014 and 2019 overwhelmed U.S. resources. In both of those years, the flow of immigrants were driven primarily by long-standing push and pull factors. Those push and pull factors include poverty and violence in migrants' home countries, and economic opportunity in the U.S., family ties, and border policies on children and families, as the Migration Policy Institute outlined in a 2019 report. In 2019, another factor was a chaotic implementation of restrictive southern border policies under Trump, Pierce told us. The difference this year is that the increase overwhelming U.S. resources has been entirely driven by unaccompanied child migrants, Pierce said. The flow is due to push and pull factors, as well as the coronavirus pandemic caused economic crisis and recent hurricanes. All three experts we spoke with told us there may be a perception that the Biden administration is more welcoming to migrants, but Biden has not significantly changed operations at the border since Trump as of yet, as Brown said. In mid-February, the administration announced it would begin processing non-Mexican asylum seekers who have been waiting in Mexico for the U.S. court dates under the Trump-era program to keep those individuals on the other side of the border. But that policy doesn't concern new arrivals or those with pending asylum cases, the administration said. One notable change for unaccompanied children, however, is that they are the only population that is officially exempt from the CDC's Title 42 order. So, you might ask, at this juncture, what is Title 42 and how has it affected immigration flows? Title 42 is a public health law the Trump administration began invoking in March 2020 to immediately expel, due to the coronavirus pandemic, those apprehended on the southern border. In November, a federal judge ordered a halt to such deportations of minors. While the Biden administration has continued to use the law to expel adults and some families, it has stopped expelling children. We are expelling most single adults and families, Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas said in a March 16 statement. We are not expelling unaccompanied children. While that's certainly the case for single adults, CBP data show the administration expelled 41% of family units in February, down from 62% who were expelled in January. Brown noted that migration started to increase in April 2020 and continued to rise through the Biden inauguration. So it is not true that the increase started under Biden, but the decision not to expel unaccompanied children sped up the increase. A somewhat new phenomenon being reported by attorneys for migrants in the region is that it seems that some unaccompanied children actually arrived in northern Mexico with family members who sent them into the U.S. alone, since the U.S. was letting them in, and then the adults would try to come in later, she said. At the same time, Title 42 may have artificially inflated the problem of single adults being apprehended because some are trying to cross repeatedly in short time frames. We know that single adults have driven the majority of the total increase in encounters at the border, Brown said in an email, but we also have been told by CBP that as many as 1/3 of those are repeat encounters with the same person. We believe that because Title 42 results in rapid expulsion of migrants back to Mexico within a very short period of time, and no immigration process, and therefore no immigration bars being applied, the opportunity cost to migrants to repeatedly try to cross the border is low. Brown said there are reports that smuggling operations are charging rates for up to 3 attempts. The increase in single adults also could be due to people sending children ahead of them and attempting to follow separately, but there are not detailed statistics on that, she told us. So what's the process for these unaccompanied kids? How many unaccompanied children are being held in Customs and Border Protection custody? Well, I'm glad you asked. Unaccompanied children are generally referred to the Department of Health and Human Services Office of Refugee Resettlement. Some from Mexico can be returned home. A Congressional Research Service report explains that the vast majority of these kids in recent years are from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. While that referral process is taking place, they are held in Customs and Border Protection custody. A backlog due to the increase in unaccompanied children arriving at the border and policies in place due to the coronavirus pandemic has led to a crush of kids being held in border facilities. One lawmaker released images of kids sleeping on cots on the floor. A CBP spokesperson wouldn't tell us how many children are now in custody, saying that it doesn't provide daily numbers, as they are considered operationally sensitive because of CBP's in-custody numbers fluctuate on a constant basis. The number it shares one morning may be different by the afternoon and the next day. That's interesting. I wish they would have explained that a little more, because I wonder how that works. Anyway, CNN reported on March 20th that more than 5,000 unaccompanied children were in CBP custody, according to documents obtained by CNN, up from 4,500 children days earlier. The children are only supposed to be in CBP custody for up to 72 hours before being transferred to the Office of Refugee Resettlement. CNN reported that the children were being held on average of 5 days and that more than 600 of them have been in CBP custody for more than 10 days. Unfortunately, HHS waited until March 5th to start bringing beds back that were taken offline during the pandemic, Pierce told us of the problem. While HHS is making efforts to expand their capacity by bringing these beds back online and acquiring new influx facilities, their lack of bed space has led to the current backup of children in CBP custody. The CBP spokesperson told us the agency's ability to move children out of its care is directly tied to available space at HHS ORR, and that everybody's focus is on moving UACs through as quickly as we can. A lot of acronyms flying around here. I hope you're following these. Anyway, past administrations have also struggled to get unaccompanied minors, not minors, coal miners, anyway, out of CBP custody. In November 2019, for instance, the Department of Homeland Security wrote, "One of the most visible and troubling aspects of this humanitarian crisis, one that manifested itself in April, May, and early June 2019, was young children, sometimes for a week or more, being held by CBP's Border Patrol, not because it wanted to hold them, but because HHS had run out of funds to house them." This is back in 2019 now. A July 2019 DHS Office of the Inspector General report warned of dangerous overcrowding of kids held in 5 border facilities. It said CBP data showed 2,669 children, some who arrived at the border alone and some with families, had been held for more than 72 hours, with some children younger than 7 years held more than 2 weeks. Once with the Office of Refugee Resettlement, children stay in shelters while awaiting immigration proceedings, including asylum, before being placed with a sponsor, who could be a parent, another relative, or a non-family member. In fiscal year 2019, 69,488 children were referred to the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which has cared for 409,550 children since 2003. The HHS press office told us there are currently about 11,350 children in ORR care. Data from HHS from fiscal year 2012 through 2020 show that at least 66% of referred children each year have been male. They are primarily from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, and most are age 15 or older. The Biden administration has tasked the Federal Emergency Management Agency with assisting HHS in housing the children. So, lots of acronyms floating around there, but hopefully you followed all of them. Basically, what this is saying is it's repudiating flashy headlines that are stating that there's this crisis at the border, and basically saying that there has been a crisis, so to speak, at the border for a long time, and that it goes up and down, and it has nothing to do with who's in charge and what their policies are in any direct way. I mean, it is affected by those things, but the people coming here are not coming here because of those things. They're coming here because of other things completely outside the control of whoever's in charge at the moment. And their condition is affected. Their condition once they get here is affected by the policies that exist at the time, but that's not the cause of any of this. And so that's an interesting thing, and I will take note myself because I have referred to the so-called crisis, or at least the problems at the border, in other shows, and it's good to have this clear sense of what's actually going on. Anyway, moving on. Our next article is entitled, "America's Immigration Impasse is Self-Inflicted. It Doesn't Have to Be." What a surprise. Americans' immigration impasse, an endless loop across different administrations, is largely self-inflicted because Congress has repeatedly failed to acknowledge one simple thing: immigration happens. Accordingly, immigration laws must be continually adjusted, reformed, and revised, experts say. People will always want to come to the U.S., and the U.S. will always need people, said former Commerce Secretary Carlos Gutierrez, who was a top immigration advisor to President George W. Bush. Until there is a system that allows enough legal immigration to meet the economy's needs, there will be illegal immigration, Gutierrez said. That's just part of how our economy is set up. It's part of demographics. Our birth rate is not high enough to be able to fill the needs of our economy. The coronavirus pandemic reinforced the importance of immigrant labor to the American economy, including labor by the undocumented. It opened many Americans' eyes to the precariousness of the U.S. food supply, which depends on immigrant and undocumented farm workers and meat plant workers, as well as to other immigrants' roles as essential workers, such as home health care aides, nurses, and paramedics. All of those people and many other immigrants, including young immigrants, often called dreamers, based on never-passed proposals in Congress called the DREAM Act, will play a key role in helping the economy recover from its pandemic bust. But immigration requires periodic calibration, and the economics and the changing patterns are lost in the politics. People are going to move, as they are all around the world, where you think they can find better places to better feed their children. That's the bottom line, and that's the history of migration to the United States, says Luis Fraga, director of the Institute for Latino Studies at the University of Notre Dame. The Biden administration is grappling with how to proceed and house children and teens crossing the border. Many minors have cited a simple reason for coming: to reunite with a parent who's already here, part of a previous migration. Meanwhile, millions of dreamer young adults have spent most of their lives in the U.S., having immigrated as children but lacking legal status. Most immigrant farm workers, who make up a large and essential part of the workforce, don't have the protection of work permits or green cards. The House passed 2 bills to give dreamers and farmers a path to legalization, but Senate Republicans have pretty much said it's dead on arrival, and they want a sweeping immigration bill that also tackles border enforcement. The immigration impasse has lasted long enough for multiple generations of young immigrants to have come of age here and moved into adult lives of limbo, stagnating their economic mobility along with their communities. In 2012, President Barack Obama created the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA, a stopgap fix after years of congressional refusal to legalize immigrants who had been here since they were young children but lacked legal status. Immigrants with DACA protection still face possible removal from the country, as the Trump administration threatened, but they have 2 years of intervals of stays of deportation and permits to work. Many states grant other benefits, such as driver's licenses and in-state college tuition rates in their home states. The first measure to legalize young immigrants was introduced in 2001 as the DREAM Act. Passage of the legislation, or something like it, happened so many times that it spawned the moniker Dreamers, just as those who have benefited from Obama's DACA program use documented to refer to their quasi-legal status. The House-passed bill facing opposition in the Senate would deal with some of the mostly young 4 million of the 11 million undocumented people in the country, significantly boosting their economic prospects while closing a chapter in the long immigration impasse. The majority of the undocumented population is Latino, and the population is young, which means it's a significant part of the current and future American workforce. Although the current bills are an important step, they should be seen as part of a continuous process, experts said. The 1986 Immigration Reform and Control Act made it possible for 3 million people to become legal residents. But contrary to some thinking at the time, it didn't end the issue of illegal immigration, as example of the perils of relying on the one-time-only approach. Immigration laws must be constantly reviewed, nimble, and sensitive to new developments. A regular legalization tool, known as the Registry Date, already exists in immigration law. In 1929, the law set the first date at June 3, 1921, and immigrants who could show that they had been continually in the U.S. since then could apply for legal residence. The date was updated over the decades, and it was last adjusted so that anyone in the country before January 1, 1972, was eligible to apply for legal permanent residency. In a 2010 report, the Bipartisan Migration Policy Institute, or MPI, recommended reviving the registry date. The Institute's analysis of 2018 data found that 60% of the undocumented population had been in the U.S. at least 10 years. If you set a registry date for 15 years in the past, that date just rolls forward, or say 20, says MPI co-founder Doris Messner, who was commissioner of the now dismantled Immigration and Naturalization Service under the Clinton administration. Once people are in the country for that period of time, we should adopt a statute of limitations approach, she said. MPI proposed that Congress be required to set a new date and that it review it and consider whether it should be reset every 5 years. But Messner said that given today's environment and the politics in Congress, she has little faith that lawmakers would adopt a registry date. Ultimately, the registry date is a workaround for the country's grossly inadequate immigration laws, Messner said. What you really want to do is have a managed system and have the public have confidence that the government is minding the store, she said. But the government isn't minding the store right now because it doesn't have the tools. Democrats have drafted sweeping immigration legislation based on the proposals of President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, including measures to legalize the 11 million undocumented. Meisner said the bill seeks to build in legalization programs to address future flows of immigration, which the 1986 amnesty law failed to do. Legislation in the 1990s tried to address future immigration flows, but it was adopted just before a shift in the labor market, when the country stopped producing younger workers, Messner said. In the 90s, most immigrants crossing the border were single men coming to the U.S. for work. Fulfilling that need, said Veronica Vargas Stidvent, a former Assistant Secretary of Labor for U.S. Policy and former Special Assistant to Bush. But in this decade, the Mexican economy has changed, and immigration has shifted again to families and unaccompanied minors, mostly from Central America. Fraga asked, would you have ever predicted that you would have so many, relatively speaking, unaccompanied minors coming from countries in Central America? Yet immigration policies are based on the 1990s immigration pattern. Meisner said that most of the people arriving at the border now won't qualify for asylum, but that they try anyway because it's their only legal pathway into the U.S. Few have relatives with legal permanent residency that would allow them to petition to bring in family members. If our system was working the way it's supposed to be working, family petitioning would be possible for not all of them, but for a good number of them, she said, and there would be more opportunity to come for work visas. Vargas Stidvent said the country is governing on a 2-year election cycle, while the problem is much bigger than that, and it takes a long-term approach that doesn't lend itself well to soundbite. You have to have a bipartisan group that's willing to take political hits in the short run and reach a long-term solution, and that's what's missing, she said. Immigration is going to keep happening, and frankly, from an economic standpoint, you want it to keep happening, she said. You want to have an influx of younger workers. So that's pretty much right on the money, if you ask me. Our immigration problems